call is actually we organized with Peter Doyle of Edward Jones because we talk often about how important working with our government officials are and getting updates are to our business owners to help them feel more engaged and how they can access resources. So I very much appreciate Peter helping put this together because I wouldn't be able to do it without people like him. So Peter, thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And thanks for everyone joining us today for our continuing Amesbury Chamber of Commerce program that promotes the policies and initiatives that support the responsible growth and development of our business community. Today's program features Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton. We're fortunate to have Richard Lodge, the managing editor of the Daily News, joining us to moderate today's program. During today's program, we'll be discussing the partnership that exists between local businesses and our political leaders and how these groups can work together to support the economic development of our local community. These efforts have been extremely important as businesses and communities have navigated a path forward from many devastating impacts of COVID-19. I'd like to thank Mr. Lodge and Representative Moulton for participating in today's event, and I'd like to turn that program over to Mr. Lodge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And welcome, Congressman. Glad you can be on the call.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
Hope everything's lovely down there in Washington. I'm going to just touch on a few broader issues and then bring us back to local business and the impact of the pandemic on business. But first, this actually is sort of a business question. Massachusetts is celebrating Juneteenth for the first official time this week. It's now a state holiday. And it looks like more than 45 states at least have adopted it. And I'm curious if you think that it will become a national holiday.
I do think it will become a federal holiday, but let me start by first off just thanking Phil and the Chamber for inviting me here to speak with all of you again. Peter for his support of the event, and Richard, of course, for facilitating our conversation today. I'm also appreciative of the opportunity to hear from all of you. And so I'm looking forward to your questions. And it's obviously my job to work for you, not the other way around, as your representative in Congress. Just a couple of just brief remarks to get started. I've seen and heard about the many ways that business owners got creative to stay afloat and hold on to your hardworking teams throughout the pandemic. Despite some leaders' ingenuity, of course, there are also businesses that shut down permanently and people who are still out of work and they need help. At the same time, I've been impressed by businesses that converted to something else because of the pandemic. Many have found that they're pretty good at whatever they're doing that's new now as well. I think about the commercial fish market in my hometown of Salem that has literally cut a hole in their wall and opened a counter business and now are thriving, serving retail customers, including my family and me. One way that we can, I think, provide assistance is by using this generational opportunity that we have to invest in infrastructure in the country and going big. And so I had a press conference this morning on my high-speed rail plan with Senator Gillibrand and Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and we talked about how transformative this will be for the next generation. So there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot going on, but it's far from finalized. There's much that we still have to determine in Washington, and that keeps us busy here every single day. So anyway, with that, Richard, shoot me the question again. People probably have forgotten it by now.
Sure. Just with so many states now adopting Juneteenth as a state holiday, I'm just wondering if you think that it would become a federal holiday at any point.
Yes, no, and as I said, I do think it will become a federal holiday. It's got a lot of support in Congress, but I don't know what the legislative status of it is. So I'm not sure if it's on our calendar to vote on yet, but I'm looking forward to celebrating it. And when I get home to Massachusetts on Friday, I'm going to go to a flag raising in Hamilton as part of the celebration for Juneteenth this week in Massachusetts.
You mentioned your high speed, it was a letter you helped author and to get some attention to more federal funding for high speed rail in the recovery plan, and how, bring that bring that home to the district. How does something like that, what does that mean for people in your district?
Absolutely. Well, high-speed rail would be transformative for the entire country because we're talking about trains that go 200, 250 miles per hour. In fact, the fastest trains in the world right now in regular service are in China. They go about 225 to 250. I don't see why we shouldn't have the fastest trains in the world ourselves. So maybe 275 or 300 would be a good target for American high-speed trains. What this would mean is that you could get around the country with no weather delays, with much nicer seats and the ability to get up and walk around and eat a meal while you're traveling, with no carbon footprint because high-speed rail is totally carbon-free. You just have to connect it to a carbon-free electrical supply like renewable energy. And it's also way safer than flying or driving. So it would be a great option to have for Americans. No one is saying that you'd have to take high-speed rail, but in corridors that do have this service and they do have the option of driving, flying, or taking high-speed rail, the market chooses high-speed rail almost overwhelmingly because it's such a better way to travel. You go right downtown to downtown. And so what does that mean in Massachusetts? Well, it means being able to get on a train in Boston and to get up to Portland, Maine in somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. It means getting on a train in Boston and getting to New York in an hour and a half, or down to DC in 3 hours. It means being able to travel from Chicago to Atlanta by high-speed rail and stop at a lot of cities in between. And so when we look at this as a transportation investment, one of the advantages of it is that the way it connects different parts of the country is far better than planes that just fly over. I mean, O'Hare Airport in Chicago is very busy, right? If you wanted to improve congestion there, you could pour billions of dollars into O'Hare Airport. That would probably do something for the Chicago economy. It wouldn't do anything for the economy of Indianapolis, Chattanooga, Louisville, Nashville. But those are all cities on the high-speed rail route from Chicago to Atlanta. Imagine being able to go to Chicago from Boston by high-speed train and never have a weather delay. Imagine a high-speed rail company saying, a railway saying, if this train is 15 minutes late, we will refund your entire ticket. You're never going to get that promise traveling on American highway. You're not going to get that promise traveling on any airline in the United States or in the world. But that's a promise that every single ticket has when you take high-speed rail in Spain, because the system is so reliable. So I could give lots more examples, but the point is that it would give Americans more freedom, more choice, and it's the kind of investment with a high return that we should be making in the future of our country. The debate in Washington right now about our infrastructure package is whether we're going to invest in just fixing potholes in 1950s highways, or whether we're going to invest in things like high-speed rail and high-speed broadband to truly invest in the future for the next generation.
Well, thank you. I like that guaranteed, your money back on a ticket. I wish the MBTA had that.
Richard,
Speaking
may
of-
I ask a follow-up for infrastructure?
Sure, Phil.
Is this, and I appreciate the response, Congressman, because I know that especially Rick Jacobs in your office has been beating this drum on your behalf for transportation north of Boston. But with the transportation bill, is there any optimism for funding things like the Merrimack River cleanup? Like, I know, and I don't mean cleanup like taking trash out of it, although that would be great. But I know that up in this area, we have a lot of, and Peter's very involved with this, Representative Muir is very involved with this at the state level. We have a lot of discussions about the actual, like the CSOs, the combined sewer overflows that happen farther upriver that impact communities like Amesbury and prevent us from being able to access them in a more, to access the river as a more economic resource. And a lot of that is happening because they have upriver, those communities have kind of antiquated infrastructure. Is that part of the conversation, updating, community sewer infrastructure?
It is part of the infrastructure conversation. And, this is the less sexy part of infrastructure because it's hidden, you don't see it. But sewers and water supply systems are critical infrastructure for our country. And much of it is really out of date, especially in New England, because obviously we're a much older part of the country in terms of our development than many other regions. So we have to update this infrastructure, and because it is not modern is why the Merrimack River is so polluted. You have this system of sewers. I think most of you who live in the area probably know how this works, but for those who don't, if you have a system, a sewer system that's not separate from your stormwater runoff system, they're combined, then when this runoff overflows, it overflows the whole sewer system, and you end up dumping raw sewage into our waterways that should get only runoff from streets and rivers. The result is that the Merrimack River is historically polluted. It's a massive impact not only to public health, but to our region's economy. And it's long overdue time that they get this fixed. Because various cities along the Merrimack contribute to this pollution, it's a federal problem. It's not something that just the state of Massachusetts can solve. New Hampshire has to be a partner in this. I have sat down and met with, for example, the mayor of Manchester to talk about the responsibility that she and the city of Manchester, New Hampshire have to stopping this pollution that many of the people on this in this meeting today experience with your families. So we all have to pitch in, and that team effort is what I've been a big part of with Congresswoman Lori Trahan and Senator Ed Markey and others to make sure that this infrastructure funding is included, not just in this president's package, but we've been fighting to get it included for a long time, and we have a few bills that we're working on together in Congress to get this done.
I've talked with the EPA about the infrastructure, and they said, what they told me is that it has to be shovel-ready projects. But Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill aren't shovel-ready. Is anybody working with those local municipalities to try to get them, more up to speed with their plans? If they had money available, what they would do?
Peter, that's a good question, and I should take the specific questions about those towns and cities to Congresswoman Trahan to see where they are with their particular plans and how they've updated them. One of the things we're trying to make clear with the infrastructure package writ large is that we should not be just doing shovel-ready projects, because some of the best investments we can make in the future aren't shovel-ready yet. And there was an interesting article about this recently in the Boston Globe or someplace like that that said that it was probably a mistake of the Obama administration in 2008 to focus exclusively on shovel-ready projects, because a lot of times the shovel-ready projects are just the old things. They're not the transformative kind of infrastructure that we need. And so it's important that when we look at actually making these investments, we ensure that we have the most modern sewage systems, the most modern water systems that we can build today, not just some plan that was on the shelf 20 or 30 years ago and might not be current technology.
I'm kind of afraid in some ways it's a symptom that those communities aren't very progressive in dealing with it. I think you've seen their sewage rates are like 60% lower than Gloucester. So I almost feel like their strategy is to delay any improvements of the federal government pays for it. And I'd like to see somebody locally put some pressure on them to be more proactive. Recently I talked to the mayor of Haverhill, and he says CSOs weren't an issue.
Well, Peter, look, I think that's a fair point. And as I said, I don't represent those communities, so I'm not familiar with the details of their sewage structure plans, but it's certainly an issue, a complaint that I can pass along to Congresswoman Trahan. I think what you're saying makes sense.
Seth, there's some good questions folks have posted. One about relating to the high-speed rail. Is there a prioritization in the infrastructure plan related to high-speed rail and electric vehicle infrastructure to replace gas stations? In other words, would either of those be a priority? If you're trying to get people out of their cars into trains, that's one thing. But if you're trying to get them into electric vehicles, less pollution, is there any kind of priority on replacing regular gas stations with quick charging stations, for example?
Yes, there is. And there's a lot of priority on the vehicle economy and converting vehicles to electric with the supporting infrastructure. I would argue that there's too much focus on that at the expense of high-speed rail. Look, we can all be riding around in electric vehicles in the next few years. We're still going to be sitting in traffic. In fact, if you provide a lot of subsidies for electric vehicles, you're subsidizing people driving, you're actually going to create more congestion we'll just have silent traffic jams. And I'm not sure that that's really going to help anything. In fact, I'm quite confident that it won't. So if you really want to have transformative benefits, then you have to do things like high-speed rail. A good conclusive study that illustrates this is a study that was done in partnership between state of Washington, state of Oregon, and actually Microsoft, who contributed a bunch of private sector money because they know how transformational high-speed rail can be for an economy. They studied the Cascadia corridor between Portland and Eugene, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, and Vancouver, British Columbia. And they determined that if you build a 225-mile-per-hour high-speed railway for about the cost of about $40 billion, which is a lot of money. $40 billion is not cheap, but if you build it for $40 billion, you're going to get $355 billion in economic benefits. So you're plus 315 if you make that investment. Now, another alternative to address the congestion amongst those cities would be to add a lane to the interstate, to I-5. Well, it turns out that adding just a single lane to the interstate in either direction costs $80 billion, twice as much as building high-speed rail. But there are no economic returns because congestion just gets worse. So you can't travel any more quickly between those cities, and therefore you're negative 80. So look, when you do the analysis on this, the costs and benefits, you do high-speed rail. Yes, it requires an upfront investment, but you get way more return than the cost of the system. You're plus $315 billion. You invest that same money in highways, well, it costs twice as much. You're negative 80 billion. That's a massive difference. If we just did the math on this, we'd be investing in high-speed rail all over the country. And the way we're trying to change policy here in Washington is to just force states to actually do that math, make the investment that makes more sense, ultimately for you, the US taxpayer.
Thank you. A couple of questions relating to employers struggling. What discussion is happening in Washington at your level when it comes to the seeming disconnect between the need to help employees and yet employers are struggling to find help at all levels?
Are you talking about, Rich, are you talking about in particular the difficulty with hiring staff right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I mean, look, there is widespread concern in the business community, and I've heard this from a lot of local businesses, restaurant owners in particular, that the unemployment assistance that we've offered in the American Rescue Plan has been too generous, and so people are making more money from staying at home than they are from getting a job. And now there was a study done out of Yale about this issue early in the pandemic, and they determined that this was not the case. I think that, we're later in the pandemic now, we're coming out of it. I've heard this anecdotally from so many business owners. I personally believe that there's some truth to this, and maybe the benefit from in economic terms was a little bit too high. But the point I would make is that this is a free market, folks. If you need to raise wages to attract help, then that's what you need to do. And I remember hearing from a local restaurant owner not too long ago who said, look, I can't get people to come even for job interviews at the wages I'm offering. I therefore can't fully staff my restaurant, and I've got a line out the door of customers who want to come eat. I mean, just to go back to economics 101 here, folks, like, you've got more demand than you need to raise your prices, and then you can raise your wages. So there's a degree to which everyone just needs to, I think, wake up to the fact that you're going to have to raise some wages in order to hire the staff that you need. You might have to raise prices as a result. Frankly, the Fed wants to see more inflation than we've had over the last 5 years. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And it may be the case also that you can adjust in the future. But that's just an economic reality of the situation that we're in at the moment.
We have another question from a person who says that we're lucky to have had some new businesses actually start up right before the pandemic hit or during the pandemic, and yet they weren't necessarily eligible for funds that were made available. Is there any kind of funding that might open up for new businesses to make sure that they get the boost that they need, that they continue?
Well, I'm a big supporter of all the funding through the Small Business Administration. I used to sit on the Small Business Committee here in the House of Representatives, where I became familiar with a lot of these programs. And that's something that we will continue to fund. I don't think that there will be another big sort of economic stimulus package specifically directed at the pandemic, unless, of course, the pandemic comes back because not enough people are getting their vaccinations. That's always a concern in the back of our minds. But right now, I think people feel that the current stimulus was a good investment. Some people think it was even too generous. So I don't expect to see any more of that coming anytime soon.
Okay. As Phil said, I think at the beginning, we're certainly open to questions. Anyone on the call can jump in. You can either type it in or unmute and ask the question yourself. I'm curious what, in terms of your ability to get around the district, it's obviously probably gotten a lot easier in the last month or so, unmasked. Where in your district are you seeing areas of real strength, like particular business sectors that you may be even surprised they're doing well, and other areas where things just aren't coming back, where people are still really hurting as you're seeing it?
Yeah, good question, Richard. Well, certainly, the construction industry is thriving. The real estate market is as hot as we've ever seen it, or at least as I've ever seen it. And so, try to get an electrician or a plumber these days, it's pretty tough. The price of raw materials has gone up dramatically. The price of wood is, I think, about doubled, and yet people are still buying it. They're still putting money into their homes. Some of these are renovation projects, other are related to buying new homes and new construction. But that's certainly an industry that seems to be doing, or a sector, I should say, it's more than one industry that seems to be doing pretty well. I think the fishing and the lobstering industries are still kind of bouncing back, and that's the case for the restaurant industry as well. There are restaurants that thrived during the pandemic and made the transition really well, and perhaps even opened new lines of business as a result. There are other places that just aren't back at full capacity yet. There are other places, as we earlier discussed, that can't find enough staff. But there are still people out there who are just reluctant to go out and be in social situations, go to a bar, go to a restaurant, go to a live concert. It's going to take a little bit of time for us to get to the point where we were at pre-pandemic levels with all of those things. Of course, critical to this is getting your vaccination. So if you're someone out there who has not gotten both of your shots, or I guess just one if you get the Johnson & Johnson, then you need to get it done, because this is critical for our economy. It's critical for, obviously, our public health. And it's a really important point that this isn't just about yourself. It's about the other people around you who might get sick if you're able to carry this disease. We're seeing a lot of variants come up all around the world and make their way to the United States. We can also expect the United States to be a factory for variants itself if we don't get our vaccination numbers up. So we've all got to make sure that that happens. If you have family members or friends who are reluctant, likely because of disinformation they saw on the internet, try to get them the truth, try to get them the facts, and try to get them to get the vaccine, because ultimately that's the single best thing that we can do to help the economy.
I think most of us have been around long enough, and I'm cynical enough to have seen places in government where task forces were set up after some kind of cataclysmic event, and I know there's it's been called a 9/11 type commission being set up to look at the pandemic and how we can avoid it another time, what we would do the next time. Do you think that there's serious or will be serious long-term discussions in DC about how do we avoid this, or how can we better prepare this country if something like this happens again?
Well, there certainly should be. And that's exactly the spirit of cooperation that we saw in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. Some people blamed the Clinton administration for not dealing with terrorism seriously enough. Some people blamed the George W. Bush administration for not taking the threat seriously enough. But at the end of the day, Democrats and Republicans came together and formed a bipartisan commission to just get the facts. because ultimately we should all agree that we don't want it to happen again. Sadly, that's not the spirit of cooperation that we've seen from Republicans in Washington today, most of whom refuse to support a commission to examine the January 6th attack on our Capitol, which was totally unprecedented, much like 9/11 in our history. And everyone seems to say they don't want it to happen again, and yet there's a reluctance to simply get to the facts. I hasten to point out that there were 36 Republicans in the House of Representatives who did vote for this commission, said it was the right thing to do, and that absolutely is the case. I sense a similar reluctance on the part of some Republicans to want to have a commission to fully look into the coronavirus, probably because they're trying to protect the reputation of Donald Trump. But we need to look into it because we don't want this to happen again. And I'm sure we would learn ways that we could have saved more lives. We also might learn ways that we could have saved lives in conjunction with keeping the economy open. Someone said to me recently, gosh, if we had simply known that you just need to wear masks indoors, that one simple thing, this would have been a lot better. That's easy to say in retrospect. And let me be clear, I understand it's much more complicated than that. But just think about the simplicity of that statement that's easy to say now. Yeah, it turns out it was really important to wear masks, but really indoors. Maybe we never had to be wearing masks outdoors, and yet for a long time that was the case. Maybe our economy would have done better if we could have gone through this pandemic without having to put masks on outdoors. But likewise, maybe we could have saved a lot of lives if we had started all wearing masks indoors much more universally and much sooner. These are conclusions that we need to come to so that we can learn from this and ultimately save lives in the future. So I hope that we can come together, put our political differences aside, and have this commission. With the January 6th commission, I should also add that Kevin McCarthy, who's the minority leader in the House representing the GOP, issued a series of demands that he wanted included in the legislation to establish this commission that differed from the proposal initially put forward by Democrats. Well, the Democrats met all those conditions, and that's why 36 Republicans in his own party said, no, you've met the conditions, you've met our demands, we should move forward. Obviously, then he moved the goalposts and refused to support it because he's just trying to defend Trump. So hopefully that won't be the case with a coronavirus pandemic, and hopefully we can find a way to look at these tragedies that have befallen this country in the last year and make sure we truly find out how to ensure they don't happen again.
Congressman, Richard, I just wanted to pull it back just to the local businesses, because I know that both of you have a close to heart end shortly. And when I speak to business owners, the single biggest obstacle that they have right now really is the finding of employees. And I know that you had mentioned earlier about the increasing of salaries. I know quite a few that have really increased their salaries. And it's funny, a lot of the restaurants in our area, especially the bartenders and servers, are seeing dramatic upticks in the tips that they collect. They just can't find people to help. I have one bartender who's a manager at one of our restaurants who had 11 interviews scheduled because she needs help. She can't do it all by herself, and she's making really good money, which is making up for the money that she lost during the pandemic. All 11 of the people that were scheduled to interview with her, every single one of them didn't show up. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think that repeating those stories over and over again to policymakers is important, because in that instance, that woman didn't know that she was going to lose her entire day sitting there kind of twiddling her thumbs waiting for people to come in. And
yeah, Phil, I heard the same story from several restaurant association members. I got on with the Massachusetts Restaurant Association, and incidentally, I was a big supporter of the the national restaurant bill that was included in the most recent relief package to give funding directly to the owners of small businesses and restaurants across America. I've also just in the past day, I think, signed on to a supplement to that fund to help restaurants that are still struggling to come through the pandemic and the aftermath. But you're right. A lot of people aren't showing up to interviews. If wages are actually high enough, so you don't have the excuse of saying unemployment is too big, then why are people still not showing up? I don't know the exact answer to that. I mean, this is something that we obviously have to look at as policymakers It's not unrelated to a situation with our hospitals where they're still struggling to find nurses. And there's a nursing shortage right now that hospitals across America are experiencing. Nurses at Addison Gilbert in Gloucester and Beverly Hospital have been raising this concern in particular. And it sounds to me like it's a combination of wages not being high enough at those hospitals. The contract is up for negotiation in the fall, so they're locked in until then per the contract agreement. But also the fact that there just aren't enough nurses in the pipeline, you know, and so there aren't new nurses out there that don't have existing jobs that they could hire. So it's a multifaceted problem that we have to address. So I'm sorry that I have to jump off, but this has been great. And I also just want to acknowledge Representative Lenny Muir, who's on the call there. He and I work together on a lot of constituent issues. He never hesitates to just pick up the phone and give me a call if there's someone that he's trying to serve that I need to help out with. We both understand the premise of public service, which is that we serve all of you, and that's our job. So if there's anything that you think that we can do to help, please reach out to my office. You can find me on the web, moulton.house.gov. You can call my office or visit my office in Salem. Follow me on Twitter or Facebook, whatever you'd like. We're here to serve you. And thank you so much for having me this afternoon.
Great. Thanks for coming on, Congressman. Thank you.
Thanks.
And you've been good about staying connected with us, and we look forward to the next program. I really do appreciate that you made yourself available. Thank you, Richard, for doing this as well from the Daily News of Newburyport, and to Peter Doyle, because Peter, I mean, you really, I appreciate you driving to make sure that this event, you know, can happen and that we can stay connected, especially as things continue to evolve so quickly in Washington. So I'll have this recording up hopefully quickly, especially now that you put us on the mark with having to get it up before Juneteenth, Richard, because otherwise it becomes stale. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Ready?
And any members that signed on to this call that have questions after the fact, let me know, and we can shoot emails as well over to the congressman or his staff to get that stuff answered. So thank you.